John chapter 8 has to be one of the least understood passages in the four accounts of the gospel. Hi guys, this is R.A. Sweeney. I am here to be answering the questions you have about scripture. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below and I will try to answer those. And while you're down there, feel free to like and subscribe so that you can check out more content, answering questions, talking about biblical languages and different things like that. So coming back to John chapter 8, there's the story of the religious leaders bring a woman to Jesus who they say has been caught in adultery. And, you know, they're kind of trying to trap him a little bit of they want to execute her and what's his take on those things, those sorts of, all of that. And it's a really weird passage. When you read it, you're kind of just like, this doesn't make sense. There's some things in there that you're like, you guys aren't following your own rules in terms of Torah compliance and how you should be handling this. It's really not good. And I feel like to make it worse, everybody wants to comment about what Jesus was writing in the sand. Because, you know, while they're bringing stuff up, he crouches down and he's using his finger drawing in the sand. I've heard so many people, and people want to say definitively, like, I'll tell you, I know exactly what Jesus was writing. Here's what it is. It doesn't say. So, no, you don't. You don't know exactly what Jesus was writing. I'm not going to say I know exactly what Jesus was writing because it doesn't say and we don't know. But I feel like there's some clues to the story that can help us make sense of what's going on with this passage. And so we have a woman who is caught in adultery that Jesus is able to just masterfully disarm the situation. We've got markings in the ground. We've got a finger that is writing something. There's a handful of weird details that I feel like when we latch onto those details and start looking at the Old Testament to see what's going on, what is Jesus trying to replicate here, really kind of helps. And I talked last week, I think it was, about how to view some of the like the Apocrypha, some of the extra biblical books. And that's going to be important here too. So when you read the book of Daniel, there's actually more to the story than just what we have in the book of Daniel. And that's where the Apocrypha comes in handy. There's a few extra chapters in Daniel. Daniel he's a pretty well-known character. He worked for the king of Babylon, essentially, and then the king of Media and Persia's, power dynamics played out there. But he was an advisor to the kings in exile, and just super wise. Like, everything that he did was just demonstrations of this guy has the wisdom of God in remarkable ways. And in the Bible, there is a story where the king, he's presented as the king. Historical records seem to suggest that he maybe wasn't exactly the king. He was just like a high-ranking official that the king had left in charge while he was on conquest. It's debated and not really important. But he's the guy who's in charge, at least, is throwing a party, and he's just, obnoxiously abusing God, bringing temple vessels in for his debauchery that he's engaging in. And this hand appears, just a hand, like, imagine that my sleeve is where things stop. Hand comes and it starts carving words into the wall. Daniel comes in, he's able to read it and interpret it, and it's you've been weighed, you've been measured, and you've been found wanting is usually how we translate that. But the idea is, like, I've had enough of your shenanigans here, guy, and I've decided to bring judgment upon you because you are being so disrespectful. I can't tolerate this anymore, and judgment's coming. So we've got that story, which in and of itself, to be able to say writing on the wall, writing on the sand, is it the same thing? Probably not enough evidence to connect. But when we look in the Apocrypha, those extra chapters of Daniel that aren't really considered scripture, but are considered pretty reliable and helpful for understanding the texts, one of the stories about Daniel is there's a woman who is accused of being caught in adultery, and she's brought to the leaders to execute judgment on her because she has been caught in adultery. And Daniel hears about it because there's some dispute over, did she, didn't she, how trustworthy is this report? And Daniel says, give me some time to figure it out. long story short, he prays, he executes wisdom, he comes up with this, tricky way of figuring out, like, hey, I can prove that she didn't do it. And basically, he lawyers her out of all charges by the application of wisdom. And so putting that into the parallel, now we've got a woman who's being accused of adultery wrongly, brought before the leaders to figure out if they can be executed, and the wise man is able to use wisdom to determine that she's innocent and at least get her cleared of the charges. And we've got the finger that is drawing something out. And it's like, okay, there's a bit more of a connection there. But then the other story that we have is in Babylon, there was a temple that had a idol statue of a dragon, and sacrifices were made to the dragon all the time. They bring in like foodstuffs and things like that as sacrifices to the dragon. And like you had in most pagan temples, the priests would go in and they would remove the sacrifices. They might, play it up and leave like some like chewed up crumbs and stuff like that, but really trying to make it look like the idol did consume the sacrifices to kind of play up the imagery that this is actually the God that we're telling you it is actually is coming and accepting your sacrifices. And so Daniel, he sees it, the king is bragging about it, the priests are bragging about it, and Daniel's just like, this is all fake, right? Like those priests are the ones that are doing it, and the priests, they don't want anyone to find out that they're doing it. Seemingly, the king doesn't realize the priests are the ones that are doing it. And so they devise this plan where they will put the sacrifices in the temple at night. They will seal the doors. The king himself will put his royal seal on the door, so it cannot be opened without him finding out that it was opened. And we'll see in the morning if the sacrifices are gone. And so they do the plan. They open the doors in the morning, they look inside, and the sacrifices are all gone. Somehow, the sacrifices disappeared overnight, even though the doors were all locked and could not be opened by the priests. And they're all coming to Daniel like, see, this proves it. We know that, it wasn't the priests that did this because, how could they? And Daniel lets out the ace that he had tucked up his sleeve. He's like, hey, I didn't tell you guys, but I sprinkled flour all over the floor. There's like a dust all over the floor. So let's go take a look. And there's footprints all over in the room, and it leads to a trap door that they were able to come in through the trap door and remove the sacrifices. So he catches the priest red-handed in this because if I remember right, they even had like some of the flour on their shoes or something. Like it's very, very overt. Like, oh, hey, I caught you. So now we have a story of a woman caught in adultery that wisdom was able to expose that she wasn't actually guilty. We've got a finger writing something that's pronouncing judgment because you've been dishonoring God. You've got markings in the ground showing that the priests have been lying and tricking and deceiving. All those things are now really starting to line up with John chapter 8. And so we see in the Bible, there's a lot of places where things are thematically grouped, especially in the gospel accounts, where you'll group multiple stories together that are meant to look like stories from the Old Testament to kind of paint the picture that Jesus is like that person. So there's David's probably one of the most common ones where we're presented with the idea that Jesus is a new David. There's places where Jesus is a new and better Solomon. And here what I feel like it's trying to do is just paint Jesus in a Daniel sort of light to say like he is just a righteous and wise leader like Daniel was in Babylon. And so it's trying to put those things side by side. So I feel like that's how we should be looking at this passage. Who cares what's written on the ground? I don't think that's the point. The point is that the finger is writing something out. There's markings on the ground showing that they were, it's trying to draw the bridge between the two stories on a more macro level than trying to say, let me tell you what was written on the ground. So I think we're supposed to walk away from John chapter 8 saying, Jesus is like a new and better Daniel, is the big takeaway from that. There is a lot of debate on whether or not this is original to the Bible or if this chapter was added later. I personally don't even really care. It's an awesome awesomely crafted story. I think it, whether it fits or not, to me, doesn't really matter. Like, this is a great story. It doesn't contradict anything, so I say leave it in, and that's how I'm looking at it. As to what's written on the ground, here's where I'm going to start going out of what I can really prove, and this is just a guess. I said earlier, nobody knows. I don't know. You don't know. Nobody. Well, God presumably does know. It's possible that he didn't write anything. He was just drawing pictures or who knows what. So maybe, God's just like, he didn't write anything. But my thoughts on the matter, given all of those connections, my guess is he wrote the same thing the finger wrote on the wall in Babylon. You've been weighed, you've been measured, you've been found wanting. Kind of that, like, it's time for you to stop acting the way that you're acting. I'm sick of it. Judgment's coming, and this isn't going to continue, sort of deal. And honestly, the story in the end, the religious leaders are all shamed and sent away shamed. Not killed the way the Babylonians were that very night in the story with Daniel, but it's a similar sort of follows the pattern. So my guess is it's something along the lines of him writing, you've been weighed, you've been measured, you've been found wanting. I can't prove that. I don't know that. That's just kind of how I view that. But really the big thing is to say that this is a new and better Daniel figure that we have here, because Daniel was awesome and did wonderful things for God's people, both the Israelites and the non-Israelites. So I think it's trying to put those two on parallel. So that is what I have for this week. I hope it's a blessing. And like I said, please feel free to give me your questions, like and subscribe so that we can make more of these videos. Thanks, everyone.